Okay, great. Thank you all for coming to TechSoul. Welcome to TechSoul. So let's see, how many of you guys have been affiliated or are affiliated with the cell phone industry? Okay, a few. So we have today a very, very special guest here, dubbed as the father of cell phone. Marty Cooper has been involved in the wireless industry since 1954, 29 years at Motorola, and including forming and managing the division that created and ran the Motorola cell phone business, and when it was the world leader actually in the cell phone industry, if you guys remember those days. And so he conceived the first handheld cell phone and made the first cell phone call in 1973. He's been the CEO of CBSI that managed the information service and billing for most carriers during those days, and served on public and private boards of director of various companies. He's a member of the FCC Technological Advisory Council and the trustee of the Illinois Institute of Technology. So with that, I would like to maybe start it out by taking you back to 1973, or rather, prior to April of 1973, when you introduced the first cell phone. So tell us, what was it like back then? What was the primary use case or the motivation of a cell phone? Because I know it's evolved so much now, but if you go back to 1973, what was it that people wanted to do with a cell phone?
Well, I look around this room and I see a lot of very young people here. Were you all born in 1973? You would not believe how primitive things were in 1973. There were no digital cameras, and the internet had not yet been invented. The personal computer hadn't been invented yet. The transistor had been invented, and they had just learned how to put a few transistors together on an integrated circuit, but getting more than a few thousand was beyond the capabilities. So why did we even think about making a portable phone? Well, it turns out Motorola was in the two-way radio business. Everybody know what two-way radio is? I spent most of my business career making two-way radios. The biggest problem I had was explaining to my mother what I did for a living. She would much rather that I was a doctor or a lawyer that she could tell her first about it. And I said, I make two-way radios. But we learned a few interesting things. We learned that people are fundamentally inherently mobile. You go on a freeway today and you discover that nobody is where they want to be. Everybody's going somewhere else. And the phone company at that time told you that the only way to communicate was be hooked up with a wire and changing to the wall. The other thing we learned was that mobility and productivity were directly correlated. We've had, whenever we would teach people how to be connected, whether it was with a portable or with a two-way radio in their cars, when they integrated those things into their businesses, they couldn't run their businesses without it. Well, that's obvious today. All those things are obvious. The third thing we learned in those days, and since then, is that the good guys usually win. Because we were in a battle with AT&T. This is the old AT&T. And this was a monopoly. And they were the biggest company in the world. A guy in, I guess it was in the 1940s, wrote a memo at Bell Labs that talked about the cellular concept, the idea of having cells. You guys are not in the cell phone business, but you know how cell phones work, right? There's lots of cells in the city. And they wrote this memo, and about 30 years later, and they decided maybe they should do something with this idea. And they went to the FCC and said, well, we'll build a cell system, but it's not going to be very big business. And we want a monopoly to do that because we can't. Not only do we want a monopoly, but we'd like to be able to provide two-way radio business, too, on a monopoly basis, which of course would have put Motorola out of business. So we engaged in a battle with AT&T, and the genesis of that first phone, and I should have brought it with me, but I can't imagine any of you haven't seen me.
It looks like this.
Oh, you have seen me. It's me 45 years ago. You're going to be distracted. We do, Motorola, AT&T was the biggest company in the world. Motorola was we were $1 billion company, but compared to AT&T, we were nothing. And we took on AT&T, and our message was, number one, nothing should be run by monopolies. And then number two is the time is ready for a handheld portable. Get rid of the wire, putting somebody, we've been restricted by that wire for 100 years, and now we're going to put somebody in the car and be restricted by the car. That's even worse than the wire. So the time is ready for portables. And the bottom line is that AT&T had two lobbyists for every FCC commissioner. They had a lobbyist for every representative and every senator. And they spent millions of dollars on that thing. And here we were with three people in Washington doing everything. We took them on, and I guess you know the result. We didn't win. So you ended up being competitive, and we persuaded people that the portable was the way to go. It was a long slog. It took 10 years from the time we demonstrated that first phone in New York, and mostly because we weren't quite ready yet. That first phone, that thing that I'm holding up there, had literally thousands of parts, all hand wired together. When I demonstrated this thing on the streets of New York, you would think that I was thinking about creating history. And I was thinking, boy, I hope this damn thing works. Sure, we had a guy, there were only 2 units, put together all by hand. We had an engineer standing in the background with an extra one just in case the first one didn't work. And it didn't work, thank goodness. But that is the genesis.
So I'm assuming that the features or functionality, because today we can fill pages when we talk about a feature that a cell phone has, but the feature was voice calls, or was there something beyond voice calls?
It's just make phone calls. That's what it did. Had the cone weighed, well, you see what the size is, weighed 2.5 pounds. Battery life was 20 minutes of talking. And it was quite adequate because you couldn't hold this heavy thing up. But that was it was a phone.
So did you ever envision that the cell phones will become so smart the way phones have become today? They are so much more than just a voice call device.
Yeah, well, the bottom line is no. We envisioned that everybody was going to have a cell phone, and I guess we were right about that, right? But the story we told, because we were looking for the elevator pitch, was that someday when you were born, you would be assigned a phone number, and if you didn't answer the phone, you would die. So we knew that was going to happen, but we were not smart enough to figure out that the phone would embrace the camera. And of course, the internet hadn't been invented, and the combination of the cell phone and the internet are truly revolutionary, changing the behavior of people. And as long as I mentioned that word, that really was what it's all about. Because I just sat in on this session on 5G, and everybody here from Qualcomm? Good, I can say it on something about Qualcomm. In the Qualcomm, I only talked about the number of devices and how wonderful this technology is and the speed and all these other things. And the world is not about devices and speed, it's about people, behavior, how my life is affected and hopefully improved. And that has always been the essence of and what I learned at Motorola and in the real world.
So you mentioned that, when you were making that first phone call, what was on your mind was that I hope this damn thing works. Any memorable incident or blooper, anything that you remember that you may want to recall?
Well, I can't believe it. Is it really true that only a few of you are in the cell phone business? Yeah, I guess so. So you never have heard the story about the first phone call? Somebody that you have. Because well, we got lots of time. I'll tell you the whole story. The event that we put on in New York was the first part of a PR campaign where we were trying to get the attention of mostly the FCC, but also the Congress who run the FCC. And so the first event was we were going to get on the morning show of some television station. This was a big deal. And then in the afternoon we were going to do the press conference, which we did. Well, it turns out I get a phone call. I get waked up in the morning, and the morning show bumped us. Something more important came on. But they had arranged for me to get interviewed by some radio station, and we have never been able to find who that station was. How unimportant this event was. So I told them, look, if we're going to be interviewed by a radio station, I want to do this walking around so people get the real feel for portability. Sitting in a chair, which is most of the interviews I do, doesn't tell you much about why it's important to have a portable phone. So there I meet this guy on the street, and I'm doing my pitch. And I say, thinking, now, who can I call? And it sounds incredible because for me, it's become part of my history. I'm going to call my counterpart at AT&T. my competitor. He's a guy that his statement was, that Motorola is an annoyance to us. We've got a big plan, we're the biggest company in the world, we know what the future is, we don't need these guys, and this guy Cooper is just a PR guy. And so I'm going to call Joel Label. And so I dial his number, and a miracle happens. He answered the phone. So I say, hi, Joel, this is Marty Cooper. Oh, hi, Marty. I'm calling you from a cell phone, but a real cell phone, a personal, portable, handheld cell phone. You could see I wasn't bashful about twisting the knife. And he was very polite. And to this day, Joel Abel has not stopped hating me. and he doesn't remember that phone call, and I guess I don't blame him. But that was the historical first call.
So Marty, going beyond that first phone call, what role did you play in the evolution of the cell phone over the years following that first phone call?
Very little. We, for the next 10 years, we took this huge phone that's up there and did 4 additional iterations, each one getting smaller, each one getting a little more practical. And then by the time we came up with a commercial version in 1983, AT&T actually started service in Chicago. It's October of 1983. a company called American Radio Telephone Service started offering service in Washington, D.C. in December. So AT&T beat us by 3 months, but they offered a mobile telephone system, and in Washington there was a portable telephone system. And by that time, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I met this wonderful woman who was speaking in another room, which is where most of the people are in. We have an intimate group like this where I can really relate to you. But I want many more people listening to my wife because she's a lot smarter than me. So I became an entrepreneur. Arlene and I have, in the years since 1983, we actually met in 1979. We have started a number of companies. The most recent one was Great Call, which the Jitterbug phone, if any of you are familiar with that, that's now part of Best Buy. And we are now working on our latest concept, which is it's too complicated for me to describe. But it's going to be a big deal, and it involves privacy, personal storage, and you can bet that it's going to be people-oriented. So what I do now, first of all, I'm writing my book. So really, you thought you came here to listen to me talk. Really, I'm pitching this book. I've been working on it for about 7 years, and I have no idea whether it's going to be any good enough, but you should go out and buy one when it's available. In fact, if you see me mention that we had this talk here, I'll give you one for nothing.
So what's the title of the book, sir?
Pardon?
The title of the book?
I haven't figured that out yet. I'll tell you a couple of my potential titles. My working title is Hello! Exclamation point, the story of the cell phone, because that's the one thing that I think you say that in every country. You say hello. And the second title is Lessons Learned, because I think that's what people.
Did you say hello when you made the first phone call?
No, as a matter of fact, I didn't. You are a killjoy, you know? You just wiped out my title. No, I did not.
So you also came up with the law of spectral efficiency, I believe, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that law is and what impact did it have on the cell phone?
Well, that has no impact at all because people refuse to pay attention to me. But it is one of the most important. It is at least as important as Moore's law. And it says that the capacity of the usable radio spectrum. Am I getting over with people? Everybody here know what radio spectrum is? I don't want to talk down to you guys, but have you noticed? Let me back up a little bit. That everybody talks about a shortage of radio spectrum. Everybody heard that? I'm unaware of such a shortage. Anytime anybody wants to start a business, any carrier wants to provide more service, they've got plenty of radio spectrum. The reason they do is because there's only a certain number of frequencies available, but the engineers have figured out how to keep increasing the capacity using new technology, if I had another 5 minutes, I could educate you all on what these are because they're not all that complicated, but cellular being one of them, of increasing the capacity, and the technology has always stayed ahead of the demand. There's one guy, a professor, just put up a chart. It was not from Qualcomm, so Qualcomm's off the hook on that one. And his chart said that, there's a serious shortage of capacity, and the capacity is, the requirements are going to go up exponentially, and what are we going to do? And the bottom line is, there is this law that I call the law of spectrum capacity. Some people call it Cooper's law. That's kind of arrogant. But it says that from the time of Marconi, which is when radio was invented, that the capacity of the usable spectrum, you know, when Marconi invented, the usable spectrum was just a little bit down at the bottom, but we kept going higher and higher. The capacity of the usable spectrum has doubled every 2.5 years, every 30 months. That doesn't sound like much. Well, it turns out that in 50 years, that's a million times increase in capacity. And in 100 years, it's been 120 years. It's 1 trillion times increase in capacity. And we know enough about the technologies of the future that we can keep doing this for another 50 or 60 years, just with stuff we know about. So we're always going to stay ahead, you know, if people use the technology.
Just keep making the cells smaller, I guess.
That's not so, Umar. There are many other ways of doing that. But you know, I had another 15 minutes.
So
I could make you all experts at that.
So speaking of capacity increases and all, what do you think is the current driver for 5G? Is that just higher download speeds and you know, to enable a better quality video streaming, or is it really beyond that?
First of all, let me start by saying 5G is really important. It is the next step in the cellular revolution. It's kind of interesting that all the first Gs, 1, 2, 3, 4, each one had a really substantial change in the protocols, and 5G is just an improvement overall. But it's got some very interesting things in it. It has ways of doing sharing. It has ways of applying different systems simultaneously. It has ways of accommodating the Internet of Things. So it is an incremental improvement, and it's very important. The thing I object to about 5G is the hype that's going on. Because if you guys are reading the papers, I should have brought it. I have a 2-page spreadsheet where AT&T, this is the chairman of AT&T, the guy whom I've met, is saying 5G is fantastic. It's going to be driving your cars, and you're going to be having operations remotely by 5G. Well, maybe you're going to be having an operation by 5G, but not me, because I know what wireless is like, and I'm not going to have the surgeon operating with me with this variable radio signal. So the reality is that the Internet of Things is coming, and it's important, but we haven't yet finished the Internet of People. The biggest priorities in the cellular business today are coverage, because there are millions of people in the United States, one of the most advanced countries in the world, that have zero access. There are students that go to school today that have no way of getting on the Internet. And it's my view, you're going to hear about my blog, but I have a blog on this subject. You cannot have a complete education today without having not only access to the Internet, but access to the Internet all the time. And that there are millions of people in this country that have no access at all, and millions of people that can't afford it. So the priority for 5G ought to be finish the Internet of People, improve the coverage, improve the affordability. And then you get on to things like latency. Anybody here have a latency problem? No, I didn't think so. Anybody here think it's a great advantage to be able to download a movie in a minute instead of 10 minutes on your cell phone? These are not the priority. The Internet of Things is important, but it's not the things, it's the system. You're not going to take an existing factory and put up a millimeter wave station, and all of a sudden they're going to be in the next generation. They're going to have to redesign the factories, they're going to have to design the systems. So this thing about the Internet of Things is going to grow much more slowly than anybody has thought about. We have to redesign the world to accommodate this thing. The worst thing about the hype, sorry I'm talking so loud, about the hype of 5G is this millimeter wave thing. There is so much capacity left at the lower frequencies because of the law of spectrum capacity that we don't have to go up to millimeter waves, because millimeter waves are expensive and they're hard and they cover very small areas and they're only economic in the most dense part of the city. So why are we putting all that emphasis on millimeter waves? We should be spending more money getting the capacity of the low part of the system where the economics are right and where you can serve more people. But that's my story.
Maybe satellites can come in to bridge that gap. Satellite, because satellites now have much improved technology.
Satellites, Wi-Fi. One of the good things about the people that are really thinking about it, and somebody mentioned that, is let's integrate all these things together so that whenever you communicate, you use the lowest cost, most effective, focused service for what you're communicating. So,
I would like to, I think we are running a little bit a short time, but maybe take a couple of questions from the audience. Anybody?
Marty, I heard you on the radio last week. Very good, by the way.
Did you
I
really?
made sure I had to come see you. Very good. Cellular phone used one set of network, if you will. But today our phones are using three, is that correct? For data and for text and for voice?
yeah, but they're all using the same basic channel. So everything is data today. Voice, text, it's all data. And all your carriers doing is sorting all this stuff out. And it's the applications that you're referring to. Voice is now an application. Only old people use voice anymore. Everybody else uses text. But it's all one data system.
Yes, sir.
When you look back in time, what was the most unexpected development, let's say, in cell phone, when you look back from where it started? What would you say was something that wasn't foreseen early on? Like, what surprised you the most by how it unfolded?
You know, I would have to reel back my whole life to do it, but I'll tell you the very first one, if you'll be amused by this, there was a huge, I know I only got a minute left, but I'm going to take 2 minutes. We got to the point around 1982 where we were ready to go and the FCC was slowed down, and the chairman of Motorola visited with G.H.W. Bush and said, and gave a demonstration of a cell phone. And Bush said, you know, Ron ought to see this. And you know who I'm talking about. Maybe you guys are too young to know about Ronald Reagan. So they took it into the president, and he tried something. He says, this is wonderful. Why don't we have this? And he was a very practical, non-technical guy. And they said, well, you know, the FCC is slowed down on this. And he talked to his aides. They made a phone call, and within 2 months they released the rules for it. And there was a big to-do about who are going to be the operators. People were spending millions of dollars. They had a competitive evaluation of who was going to be the operator and stuff. And over a period of 6 months or so, a year, a whole bunch of people got selected, and these people started marketing and selling this stuff before they even had it. And finally, they started to offer service. And guess what? Nobody had thought about how we were going to collect the money for these phone calls. And that was the first business that my wife and I started. We figured out that, you know, people are not paying attention to the billing and data collection. And we started that business. And the first months, we did the billing for the very first portable system, which is in Washington that I mentioned. They had 100 customers. We collected the data by computer. We had a very fast typist who typed each bill individually, and that's how those very first cellular bills went out. So I don't know if that's related to your subject. It's not a technology issue, but we surprised a lot of people when we were ready for that. Yeah.
Question. So you mentioned that for the future you see cell phones being connected to be able to can you expand more on that? You said like if multiple people have cell phones, we need to utilize the information. So I didn't really get your point on that. You mentioned how in order for the future we need to use what people already have. And then
You're saying let me tell you what the future is of cell phones. Number one, education. Our whole education system is backwards. We give people lectures. Well, if you haven't figured out by the end of this meeting, the lectures are the worst way to learn something. And the best way to learn something is to solve problems. And so the way you ought to teach people is to give them problems to solve that they can solve by themselves in a group. And go to school and have your teachers counsel you and work on you as a person, not as a big class. The second thing that cell phones do is collaboration. They let people work together. I can't emphasize that enough. And the third thing that's going to be revolutionary is healthcare. The ability to treat everybody as individuals, measure them, and measure them in real time using things. So it is those kinds of things that are the immediate revolutions.
Yeah.
What is your prognosis for the higher spectrum bands, like you have millimeter wave in 28 and 39 gigahertz or 60 and you're going to 100 megahertz? What do you think? I mean, are they useful? You think they'll prosper?
The best way I can express that is whenever you have a specific communications, you ought to use this frequency band that is optimized for that communications. So for me to hold this conversation with you, we certainly don't need to have a frequency band where I can talk 100 miles. So 60 gigahertz would be just fine if you need a thing like this. That is one of the secrets that I mentioned to you. If we could have every single conversation customized to use the frequency band that's optimized for that conversation, that alone will multiply the capacity of the spectrum by many times.
That's almost like dynamically switching the frequency band based on the use scenario.
Yeah, you ought to use whatever band is the right band to use.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Okay.
I just have a really quick question. Throughout your whole journey from having the first cell phone call to the 5G that we have right now, do you regret anything? Do you think that, like the drawbacks of how advanced our cell phones have gotten, do you think of any that come to mind straight away?
Well, drawbacks. Everybody knows about the cell phone drawbacks. I see you there. Look at you.
That was good research.
This has been an extraordinary group. I want you to know that. The most flattering thing that I haven't seen anybody picking up their phones and doing their email, and I'm very grateful to all of you for that. But there are some serious problems. When I drive around, I've made the observation that 30% of the people that I see crossing the street are looking at their cell phone. That's dangerous. I have, if you haven't figured out by now, I have an abiding belief in people. And I think we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure out what's bad about the cell phone and what's good. And people ultimately are sensible enough, most of us, to solve these problems and get over the initial experimental periods. So we're going to solve all those problems, but I do not suggest that they are insignificant problems. We are going to have to work some out. There are people that commit suicide because they haven't adapted to the modern world. The balance of this whole thing, we haven't figured out now, the net effect of the cell phone around the world has historically been positive. Billions of people have moved out of poverty because of the cell phone, and yet we've only begun. So thank you very much.